Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are doing a deep dive into the science behind ultra-processed foods. And we're not just going to skim the headlines, we're going straight to the source, a huge paper from The Lancet that pulls together decades of research on this stuff.
So right at the start, the paper poses this one really powerful question. It's not just about sugar, it's not just about fat. What if the real problem is the way our food is made, the industrial processing itself? And that's really the mystery we're going to try to unravel today.
Okay, so before we can even start to answer that, we all need to be on the same page. Scientists need a solid, consistent way to define what these foods even are, and that tool is called the NOVA classification system. It's basically the rule book for all the research we're about to look at.
So check out the official definition here. This is what's really interesting. It's not just about the ingredients, it's about the purpose. The key phrases to grab onto here are commercial formulations, hyper-palatable, and highly profitable. I mean, these are industrial products designed from the ground up to be super tasty and super profitable, meant to push out real whole foods.
And this is a super important distinction to make. Processing itself isn't the bad guy here. Canned vegetables, traditional cheeses, those are processed to preserve them. But ultra-processing, that's a whole other ballgame. It's about taking these super cheap industrial ingredients, starches, oils, sugars, and mixing them with all sorts of additives to create something that's not really food anymore. Think instant soups or those reconstituted meat products.
Okay, so that brings us to the first big question the paper asks. The scientists basically wanted to figure out, is this just a thing in a few countries, or is it a global takeover? Are these products literally pushing out traditional ways of eating? This is kind of our first big clue.
And wow, this slide just lays it all out. The numbers are pretty dramatic. Just look at how fast this is happening all over the world. In Spain, the share of UPFs in the diet nearly tripled in 30 years. In Canada, it more than doubled. And while the US seems to have kind of plateaued, at a really high level by the way, the trend everywhere else is clear. It's a rapid, full-on takeover. In this chart, this shows us where the action is right now. So sales are kind of flat in high-income countries because, they're already saturated with this stuff. But they are absolutely exploding everywhere else. A 60% jump in sales in low-income countries in just 15 years. That's not a slow change. That is an explosion.
All right, so hypothesis number one, confirmed. UPFs are taking over the world. Which naturally leads to the next big question. What does this actually do to what we're eating? How does it change our nutrition?
And well, the evidence here is pretty staggering. When a diet gets heavy on UPFs, it just gets worse across the board. It's not about one single thing. You get more of the stuff we're supposed to avoid, like free sugars and saturated fat, and way less of the good stuff we need, like fiber, protein, and vitamins. And on top of all that, you're getting a whole bunch of industrial additives and even contaminants from packaging that you just wouldn't find in a traditional diet.
But it's not just about the nutrients, or lack thereof. One of the most powerful findings, really, is that these foods don't just have bad nutrition. They seem to be engineered to make us overeat.
And get this number. This one will really make you pause. There was this major, really well-controlled study from the NIH where people on the ultra-processed diet just naturally ate an extra 500 calories a day. They weren't even trying to. And the craziest part? This happened even when the scientists matched the two diets for things like sugar, fat, and fiber. Wild.
So that brings us to the big one. The final, and you could argue, the most important question. We've seen they're taking over, we've seen they wreck our diet quality. But the billion-dollar question is, does all of this actually make us sick? And the answer seems to be, well, pretty consistent. Scientists looked at 104 different long-term studies. These are studies that follow huge groups of people for years. And the results were just overwhelming. In 92 out of 104 of them, they found a clear, direct link between eating more UPFs and having a higher risk of chronic disease.
And we're not talking about tiny little risks here. When you pool all that data together, a diet high in these foods was linked to a 90% higher risk for Crohn's disease, a 25% higher risk for type 2 diabetes, and an 18% higher risk of dying from anything during the study. Those are significant numbers.
To really put this into perspective, the paper drops this quote, and it is a stunner. It says the amount of harm linked to a high UPF diet is basically a mirror image of the benefit you get from something like the Mediterranean diet. Think about that. One is incredibly protective, and the other appears to be just as destructive. Okay, so we've looked at the global takeover, how these foods degrade our diets, and the link to disease. Now the paper pulls it all together for the final verdict.
And what they found is that all three of those big questions, they're confirmed. Step 1. Are UPFs displacing traditional diets? Yep, confirmed. Step 2. Does this make our diets worse and cause us to overeat? Absolutely, confirmed. And step 3. Is this dietary pattern linked to a higher risk of disease? You bet, confirmed.
And this brings us to the paper's big conclusion. It's call to action, really. They basically argue that we don't have to wait until we understand every single tiny mechanism, how every single additive works, before we do something. It's a lot like the historical cases with tobacco or contaminated water. People knew they were harmful long before they understood every single chemical reaction. The overall pattern of evidence was just too strong to ignore. And that's where we are now.
So when you boil it all down, this deep dive into the Lancet's findings leaves us right here. The science, pulled from decades of work all around the world, is pointing very clearly in one direction. The scientific question is becoming clearer and clearer. And that just makes the next question, the what do we do about it question, that